That's Olivia, if you can hear the barking in the background. I mean, Olive. I was getting her mixed up with the pig from the children's books. So I am a little concerned about my audio because when I sit back into my meditation posture, and if my voice drops, the guided meditation might not. I'll try to keep my voice up, but sometimes as I'm guiding the meditation, I start meditating, and next thing you know, I'm not making much sound anymore. In any case, let us begin together. Breathing, mindfully breathing. It is knowing you are breathing. And how do you know that you are breathing? There are the sensations of the breath, the touch of air coming in and out. There's the movement of the chest and the belly. The rhythmic rising and falling. In the practice of mindfulness of breathing, this is our starting point, simply to know that we are breathing, to sense that in a very broad way. Your breath might be more deep or more shallow. We're not practicing breath control. Just breath awareness. And the breath will change. Might be quite smooth or be rough, short or long, deep or shallow. Each breath with its own life, a beginning, a middle, and an end. We can be mindful of the whole movement of breath. As it enters and penetrates the body. As it leaves the body. So that we can be mindful of that movement, following the breath. Or we can let the attention rest at one point of sensation, like the tip of the nose or the belly, the back of the throat, and just feel the breath at that point. This is called guarding the breath. So either following the breath, the entire breath, or guarding the breath at a certain point of sensation. And then letting the breath naturally calm the body. We focus here more on the exhalation as the calming breath. And as we continue to feel the breath, start to notice what our felt experience is like, the pleasant or unpleasant feelings in the body, energies. With the breath, we cultivate the pleasant. It naturally arises as the body becomes more calm. A background feeling of bright energy can arise. And we find a balance then between the calm of the calming breath and the brightness, the pleasant feeling. And this can lead us to a place of contentment, just sitting with the body, the felt experience, with the mind. When we find the mind wandering, simply return to the breath, returning to the body. As we sit, we also kind of monitoring our energy. Are we sleepy or restless? Do we need to arouse energy or calm energy? Is the mind very busy? Is caught up in thinking? Do we need to make more effort to come back to the breath? Or are we being stuck in some emotion or mood that's troubling the mind? Do we need to open to that and bring a gentleness, a kindness to our own felt experience? So the art of meditation is to respond to the various states that arise, not to try to force a particular experience or a particular focus, but to bring skillful means to responding to whatever is arising. Right. Well, maybe a couple of reflections on meditation before I get into the topic of the day. Just there's a certain amount of uh, trust and kind of the the trust in the process that we kind of have to bring in order to get through the particularly like initial stages of restlessness and sometimes like bodily discomfort. And in those early stages, it's actually uh, my sense is that it's it's useful to impose a little bit of uh, discipline on yourself, because it can often feel um, like I've got to move, or this is like I can't stay still, particularly stillness. Um, but it's and and but when you keep sort of reacting to that, then you never kind of quiet down. Then the body never really quiets down because you're kind of feeding the restlessness by acting on it. And this is like it can be a very difficult little moment. And it takes, I think it takes about 10 minutes actually, not a long time. But when you feel restless, that can seem like a really long time. And it can seem like, well, how is sitting still going to make me more comfortable since I'm uncomfortable sitting still, right? That, that's the sort of the equation in the mind. But this is where the faith element, if I can offer that to you, like to trust that, if you just sit through that 10 minutes, 15 minutes of restlessness, there's, in my experience, and I'm sure there are times when this isn't true, but most of the time I find that I sort of suddenly notice like, oh, I'm not restless anymore, like that passed. So, and and this is, I've often talk about how important sort of just sitting still is, as opposed to the particular technique, whether you're focusing on your breath or a mantra or whatever, but that the stillness itself seems to just sort of have a calming effect. And so I think that particularly these days, as we're sitting alone together, it can be maybe a little harder to be still because there isn't this sort of peer group, like you're in a meditation hall and you don't want to be the one who moves. Whereas, if you're just at home and there's sort of nobody uh, that you're feeling self-conscious about, then maybe there can be tendency to act more in that restlessness. So I don't know. That just was something that occurred to me as we were sitting, and it's something that I notice in many of my sittings, that when I sit down, my first sense is, uh-oh, uh-oh, this is going to be bad today. I'm not going to be able, nothing's going to happen. Geez, I'm just going to have to force myself to sit through it. And then shortly I find, oh no, I'm settling in. So I'll put that out. And also if anybody wants to ask anything or say anything about that before I move on to my topic, I'd be happy to respond or try to respond. Okay, then. I guess I'm just so clear and everything that there can be no questions. So, you know, I've been working through my book, One Breath at a Time, since March 13th, March 16th, I started. What year was that? 2020. So we've made it to step 12, and as I mentioned before, we're in this section of the book that goes through the Eightfold Path, and it's trying to find it actually. It's called Breadth of Practice, All Our Affairs, and I'm kind of using this as a chance to sort of branch off into the Eightfold Path, and I've talked about right effort, right view and right intention. I believe it's been a little while since I've taught. By the way, I will be here on New Year's Eve for sure, and we can do what sober people do on New Year's Eve, just like stay out of trouble, basically, and watch a movie. Don't go out. Not that anybody would be going out anyway. But we'll see what comes up that night, probably something different. So I want to, having gone through the first two steps of the Eightfold Path, we come to the section of the path that is called Sila, the ethical or moral dimension of the path. And for certainly for people in recovery, this is the vital part of the path. It's really where we start, and it includes sobriety, abstinence, and it was it's our foundation, and in the foundation of our recovery, and in fact, even though in this one listing of the Eightfold Path, the Sila elements, which I'll describe in a moment, they come here at the third, fourth, and fifth elements of the Eightfold Path. The way the Buddha presents his path is that the Sila comes first. So it's sort of confusing why it's listed in these different ways. It's a little bit sort of lost in the mists of time why we have these different ways of presenting it, but our ethical behavior is seen as the foundation of all the work, that you can't sort of progress on a spiritual path without that you can't sort of jump into like mystical states or I'm going to be all spiritual, but meanwhile I'm lying, cheating, and stealing, kind of that really doesn't work. And I've been mentioned the other day, I've been reading a history of the Islamic world, which I'm just impressed by my complete ignorance, amazed by my complete ignorance about that history. But Islam takes the same approach, that's like morality is just the foundation of everything. Certainly Muhammad, this is what he was preaching, among other things. But it's nice to see that. Of course, that's shared across religions. But I want to read a little piece from Bhikkhu Bodhi, from his wonderful and vital book, The Noble Eightfold Path, The Way to the End of Suffering, a very short 120-page book that is really one of the richest Dharma books around, and full of complexity and subtlety that really takes some time to explore. So he puts these three elements, the Sila elements of the Eightfold Path, together into one chapter: right speech, right action, right livelihood. So right speech is, obviously about not lying, but also not sort of harshness of speech and using speech unskillfully. Right action encompasses the precepts to not kill, not to steal, not to harm sexually, not to harm verbally, again, speech, and not to use intoxicants. And then the third element is right livelihood, is for our work to be, skillful and bringing something positive to our community. So Bhikkhu Bodhi says, though the principles laid down in this section of the Eightfold Path restrain immoral actions and promote good conduct, their ultimate purpose is not so much ethical as spiritual. They are not prescribed merely as guides to action, but primarily as aids to mental purification. Which I find really striking, really interesting, right? So he explains this a little bit more. As a necessary measure for human well-being, ethics has its own justification in the Buddha's teaching, and its importance cannot be underrated. But in the special context of the Noble Eightfold Path, ethical principles are subordinate to the path's governing goal, final deliverance from suffering. Thus, for the moral training to become a proper part of the path, it has to be taken up under the tutelage of the first two factors, right view and right intention, and lead beyond to the trainings in concentration and wisdom. So to go back to what he says, they are not prescribed merely as guides to action, but primarily as aids to mental purification. So what he's saying, I mean, you guys speak English, so you can understand what he's saying, but just to talk about it a little bit, the idea that, so he's saying that, morality is important in terms of establishing karma. When he says, as a necessary measure for human well-being, ethics has its own justification in the Buddha's teaching. So he's like, yeah, right action and Sila has its, critical purpose just in creating good karma and creating harmony in society and in our lives. But in the Eightfold Path, which is about enlightenment, the specific purpose is the pure mental purification, which is, some interesting language, right? What he's saying is that there are external implications to your behavior, and that's the karmic consequences. But in terms of enlightenment, the internal implications are what's important. What happens to your mind when you act out of hatred, out of greed, out of delusion? What happens to your mind when you steal from someone? What happens to your mind when you're violent? And we know, just what happens to people involved in wars, PTSD, what's happening to their minds. Their minds are getting, damaged and poisoned. And of course, the most obvious thing, as addicts is what happens to our minds when we're intoxicated, when we intoxicate ourselves. And it's not just when we are under the influence, but that when we are living by this kind of principle of craving, of constantly trying to satisfy craving, the mind is, to the opposite of purified, it's polluted, right? And so he's saying, you can't attain awakening if your behavior is harming, is creating harm because it's harming your own mind when you do it, which is one of the gateways into compassion for people who do harm. Do we realize that they are harming themselves, that they are bringing, their own downfall to, not just outwardly but internally, which doesn't mean that we don't hold them accountable. But I really like this little paragraph, and it resonates with something that I started saying several years ago about sobriety for me. That simply put, I started to say sobriety for me is a spiritual state, and that there is something separate from the problem of addiction and like being clean and sober, not using intoxicants, but that's kind of the part that Bhikkhu Bodhi is talking about. The ethics has its own justification. So sobriety has its own justification. As an addict, you have to stop drinking and using, in order to get on a path. But that that it's got a higher meaning to me. That's not that it's the kind of, in other words, if I were told today that it was okay for me to drink, that it wouldn't harm me because I'm not an alcoholic anymore, whatever that means. I still wouldn't want to drink because I see that there's a spiritual value in sobriety that transcends whether it's a problem of addiction or not. And clearly, the Buddha sees that as well, because sobriety, is part of the Eightfold Path. It's the fifth precept. And in the monastic life, they don't use intoxicants, and so I like that idea. I think because after decades of sobriety, it can start to seem like, well, what's the point? So what? So I don't drink. I mean, that it's not really accomplishing anything, or I don't know. It just sort of like it loses its sort of glamour, and I'm not really proving anything. Like when you get like a year sobriety, it's like, wow, that's a big deal. Like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, like, whoa, that's an accomplishment. 36 years, like, I don't care. I mean, because pretty soon it's going to be like, man, it's just like how old I am. It's just like, fuck, yeah, I'm going to be 40 years sober. That's horrible. And so it falls back again to one day at a time, right? The spiritual meaning of it isn't about the years. Early on, the years are really important, but now it's like, wow, I have to deal with my spiritual condition. I have to maintain my spiritual condition on a daily basis, and that's what it says in the big book. But you see that it's like, yeah, it's not. I mean, it says my sobriety is contingent upon the maintenance of my spiritual condition, but then at a certain point, it's just, my purpose in my life is contingent upon my spiritual condition. The meaning of my life, the value of my life is contingent upon my spiritual condition. So, I will say that something I take a little bit of pride in, in my book, Living Kindness, which I worked with Ajahn Pasano, a great Buddhist monk in the Thai forest tradition. He sat with me for several days. I visited his monastery, and he sat with me for several days, went through the manuscript, which was, a gift beyond, beyond anything. So I was so grateful and deeply moved and touched by that generosity. But the thing that he said that I take kind of the most pride in, if that's not a sin, is that he really appreciated how much I emphasized Sila, you know. And again, it's like the sort of glamour of Buddhism is not the Sila, right? The like, oh, I'm going to be a Buddhist and get some beads and candles and a bell and stuff. The glamour is like, oh, come my concentration. Oh, my mindfulness is so great. I went on a 3-month retreat. I did, I had experienced the jhanas, and, I have so many insights, this is the glamour of it. The Sila, like, it's not what the average, like, Western Buddhist cares about. But to take it from a Buddhist monk who's been a monk for he's coming up on 50 years, who says, yeah, Sila, that, do that, it just says so much. And if I can even connect it, this might seem like an odd connection, but a little like going back to what I said about just sitting still for those first 10 minutes of the meditation. It's kind of the same thing. It's just like the foundation stuff. If you just do the foundation stuff, everything else comes out of that. When the mental purification, then all the insights will come, but if you're just trying to like, I just want to get to that, I want to get to that enlightenment, let me get to that jhana real quick, but you don't really want to take care of the foundation. I mean, that I immediately I think of like hallucinogens and people, psychedelics, and people like, oh, I mean, I broke up with somebody I was working with, somebody I was mentoring, when they said they went on an ayahuasca retreat and they got so many insights. And I was like, you've been practicing Dharma for all these years, but like one trip in the forests of Peru, and like now you're really enlightened. It's like, really? Like, I'm sorry, it's one of my get off my high horse. But and I don't mean to say that you don't get insights through psychedelics, but without the Sila, they're not really going to carry you very far, I don't think. Anyway, I know some of you might be ready to log off now. Wait, I was just on ayahuasca. What's wrong with it? Anyway, I'm very judgmental. So just for you to know, if you didn't know, that's why there's, only the select few who stick with me. So guys, there we go. I've gotten off the rails again. So you should be used to it by now. But I welcome any contributions today. Oh, one other thing I'll say before I call on you, Steve, is in the beginning of the pandemic, when my daughter was home, we started watching The Sopranos with her, and she had never seen them. So, but we didn't quite finish. So she's home for Christmas now, and we're just going through the last few episodes. And I had completely forgotten Tony goes to Las Vegas and takes peyote. And he has this moment where he's like out in the distance, like, and he starts yelling. The sun is rising. He goes, "I get it, I get it," and then the next episode he goes and shoots somebody in the head. It's like, yeah, I don't think so. Anyway, Steve.
Oh, man. Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks, Kevin. Just real quickly, I really appreciated quite a number of things that you talked about today. And at the end of this, there's this steady progression of, like you're talking about, just getting into the basics. And I'm on day 30 of abstinence from flour and sugar today, and I'm just like, I had a really tough time over the Christmas holidays because I was exposed to all these foods that I'm not supposed to eat. People bringing out pies and sourdough rolls. And I mean, being a food addict, it was really a challenge for me. But I have to say that today I got out and I did some of the meditation, worked some of the tools that I have at my disposal. And all of a sudden, I just kind of, once again, had this. I came at this with the idea of having some awakening before I transition out of this body. And it's been a long, 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 long haul. But this morning, I just had these just wonderful euphoric feelings of, I'm okay, because those cravings they're impermanent. And so you were touching on this throughout your talk today, and it really struck me how, I can do this. I just have to keep doing the work, keep meditating. And by the way, I love the barking dog. I just absolutely love barking dogs. I have 2 golden retrievers that do the same thing. But you said there was so much that was brought out today that made so much sense to what I'm experiencing myself right now. It's just that keeping that present time awareness, being mindful of my cravings and my thoughts, and know that this is a very slow, progressive thing that's going on with me, but it feels really nice because I don't care what anybody says, flour and sugar are very powerful intoxicants. And I can't even remember how long I've been sober. It's been over 30 years, so I can relate to that age thing about being sober. But it's really a gift to be with all of you. This Sangha is very special to me. I participate in quite a few, but thank you for that. And I really appreciate what you had to share this morning. I was very grateful.
Thanks, Steve. Nice to see you. Jim, Mick.
Mine's short and sweet, Kevin. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate it when you go off the rails. It makes my day. I love listening to that.
Okay, thank you. All right, no rails. Oh, there was a question. I'm sorry, and just looking in the chat that there was a question about the book title. So I will put that in the chat. It's Noble Eightfold Path. Okay.
I put it in there already, Kevin.
Oh, you did? All right, never mind.
And I actually wrote that question, and I was actually asking about the book you're reading on the Muslim faith.
Oh yeah, that one's called Destiny Disrupted. And it's a really good read. Like it's pop, kind of like popular history. So it's, yeah. Thanks, Susan. Richie, hi.
Hello. Whoops. Hello. So nice to be here. Thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot. I was reacting to, a bunch of things, but when you talked about sobriety becoming kind of like no big deal, I'm sober 32 years. And as I'm reading your book, we have very much in common. But I can remember listening early on to Sister Maurice, who it was a fairly well-known, I guess, speaker. And she talked about that. And so I do try to cultivate a little bit the idea that it is a big deal. That there are most people like me can't do it. You know what I mean? So, and that helps me in a lot of ways. And one of the great ways is in cultivating gratitude. You talked about, how the, the behavior, it's not just for ethics, it's for us, for develop. And I think gratitude is that way. I have another teacher, he said one time, gratitude dissolves the aspect of self that blocks us. He said, I think from the deeper aspects of the spiritual traditions. So that it's like, you don't have gratitude, doesn't matter. You go to the highest mountain, see the greatest Lama, but if you're ungrateful, there's no room in there for those teachings. So I'm just so delighted to have found you and to be here. And, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, Richie. Yeah, and that's kind of my saying. It's not a big deal, isn't? Yeah, I agree. It's a big deal, and I guess where I was coming from was thinking about like how it kind of feels as day by day. That and you're right that to try to evoke gratitude for that. To bring back the appreciation and the joy. Yeah, thank you. That's nice. Susan, was there something else you wanted to say? I see your hand is still.
Yeah, I did. Thank you. I think I understood that you weren't trying to diminish the the gift of sobriety and what it's meant in your life. But I have 157 days, so it's a really big fucking deal to me.
Right.
And thank you. And this is helping me so much. And I just wanted to thank you. That maybe this work seems like a long time ago to you, but sorry, early sobriety, very emotional. It's just helping me so much. I'm working on my 4th step right now, big fun. And so, the topic of Sila is, of course, super relevant. And just to echo Richie and other people, so grateful to have found this place with you online. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Susan.
Yeah, this is like definitely the upside of the pandemic is that I've been able to just sort of be accessible, don't have to go to geographic places to meet people. And so that's really, really nice. Yeah, it is, you sort of, I think we're sort of a little bit talking about like relating to different stages of recovery. And the same thing happens as a meditation teacher, trying to remember what it's like when you first try to meditate. And, actually, I mean, it's a question I have for myself as a teacher. Am I teaching people, am I going to where they are, or am I trying to like teach from where I am? Because I do think sometimes meditation teachers aren't speaking to the challenges of early practice, and the same maybe is true of me talking about recovery. And I guess it is kind of one of the challenges for me that when I wrote One Breath at a Time, I didn't have the sense that I was writing a book to help people get sober. I felt like I was writing a book to help people to deepen their spirituality once they had established their sobriety. But then it turned out that people started reading it as they were getting sober, or maybe trying to get sober. And so it's kind of an odd situation for me, because I don't know how to I don't know how to get, I can't get somebody sober, obviously. And since I got sober in AA, I've kind of felt like, well, I'm not going to try to offer you a Buddhist program per se, but it's, as long as it's being helpful, it's useful, it's helpful people. Right. So I'll stop with that. Mike. I can't hear you.
Never mind.
Okay. Yeah, it just seemed like your audio was low.
Oh, yeah, I was. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine now.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I was just gonna say I share your skepticism of hallucinogens in terms of your recovery. I've done them and feels like you're having a good time, but and you're getting insights. But yeah, I kind of agree with that. But what I was gonna ask you about, and maybe you have a comment on this, is Sila and the precepts. And I think I've heard this from you and other people that the real, it's, I was kind of a little put off by this, but the real reason that it's so important to adhere to the precepts is those bad behaviors reinforce the suffering, and that it's not so much that you need to be a good person, it's that these behaviors will really increase your suffering. The desire and the aversions are just going to be pushed into a reinforcing cycle if you don't break those behaviors. And I guess it was seemed a little strange at first. Now that I understand Buddhism and kind of the Four Noble Truths a little bit deeper, I kind of see where they're going, but I don't know. It was a little strange to hear to start with.
I know what you mean. I think that's a really good point. We think of morality as being about either, like you said, like being a good person or not harming other people, that it has some sort of value and maybe on some sort of cosmic level or something. But the Buddha brings everything back to the question of suffering, right? Is this creating suffering? And it's actually saying the same thing, but just with a less of a, what we would call moral sort of framework for it, and just framing it as about suffering. And that's that sort of really practical and extremely realistic view that the Buddha takes. Like, what happens when you do this? People suffer, you suffer, others suffer. What happens when you don't do it? You don't suffer, others don't suffer. Oh, okay. Oh, what are we trying to do? We're trying to end suffering, and not earn our way into heaven or something, or get points. So, yeah, I know what you mean in terms of sort of seeming odd, but that's definitely right. Thank you, Mike. Yes.
Thanks.
I will take you as the last person today. Nice to see you. The hair is getting good in the back too, man.
I love being last. I wanted to maybe have a clarification on something. When you were talking about Bhikkhu Bodhi's Eightfold Path book, was he saying, or were you saying that the reason why Sila comes in the Eightfold Path after right intention and right view is that you kind of have to have those things to make the Sila be genuine?
That's a really good question, and I think you're pointing to. I think that's exactly right.
Like,
I don't know if I would say genuine, but for
yeah, I guess what I was thinking of during it was like we've all, or I've experienced, the do-gooder churchgoer who on the surface, like has all the morals, but kind of wields them over their head and against others. And I've, I think that I'm no saint and I know that, and I've had the right intention for things and the wrong intention for things. And I just think that at least what I heard, like it was such a beautiful way of describing, like, we're not doing all these things. Not that I heard you say that to be superior or anything, but when we have the right intention and the right view of why we're doing them, it's actually less effort. Or I don't know. I have a bunch of thoughts going on, and I don't know if I was interpreting it correctly or, yeah.
I think that's great. And
I'll take my answer off the air.
Okay, great, Jeff. Thank you. Yeah, I think you're pointing, I think it's very insightful what you're saying, which is that, and it is a fundamental Buddhist principle that it's the intention behind the actions that really informs those actions and informs the results of those actions. And just as you're saying, you can sort of be behaving well in order to get something or to impress people, like to look like you're without, and that really doesn't have this, it doesn't purify the mind. Like if what we're trying to do is purify the mind, then that action has to be guided by an understanding, right view, which is understanding the Four Noble Truths, understanding karma, and right intention, which is being that the actions are coming out of kindness, out of non-attachment, that they're not driven by greed or ego. And it's a beautiful way of really kind of concluding this topic for today, I think, to say that we're not, the precepts are not just sitting there alone. They aren't just a self-contained thing. They're interrelated and interdependent with the other aspects of the path, because we also know like that. So the right view and right intention inform the precepts, and then the precepts, living on the precepts, inform our mindfulness and inform our concentration. They give the foundation for Zen. So it's all interrelated. Bhikkhu Bodhi in another place, I don't think it's in this book, but says that the Eightfold Path should not be thought of as a linear path, but as more like a web of interwoven elements that are interacting with each other and supporting each other. That's a really great insight. Thank you for that.